There comes a moment not on mountaintops or under starlit skies, but often in the middle of doing dishes, caught between the hum of fluorescent lights and the silence of our own thoughts. A strange whisper begins to curl at the edge of consciousness. It is not loud, not even articulate, more like the ghost of a question you've asked 1,000 times, but never quite had the nerve to answer. It arrives on the back of every book you've read about awakening, every guided meditation, every dusty scripture and modern guru's promise. What if you're not searching for enlightenment? What if enlightenment is searching for a way to release you? And this quiet suspicion is the first fracture in the glass dome. The idea of enlightenment has become a lighthouse for the lost, a dangling fruit for the seeker, a word worn thin by years of chanting, striving, climbing toward it. But the deeper irony, and perhaps the crueler joke of it all, is that the very light you believe is far ahead may already be suffusing the walls of your reality. Not as salvation, not as freedom, but as the trap itself. To understand this, we must discard the well-walked roads, the paved paths of higher consciousness, the smooth escalators promising transcendence if you just breathe right, eat clean, think pure thoughts. What if the temple was never at the end of the journey, but the very architecture of the prison itself? You are not outside enlightenment clawing to get in. You are already immersed in it, saturated by it, drenched in a brilliance so constant, so blinding. You mistook it for the background static of existence. This is the dream within the dream. Think of a fish who's never known the dry kiss of air, trying to comprehend water. It flails, thrashes, searches for something other, unaware that what surrounds it, what defines its movements, is the very substance it cannot see. You are that fish, swimming in a sea of awareness, screaming for a shoreline that never existed. You pray for arrival, never realizing you were born in the cathedral. And every moment you strive to reach the divine, you unknowingly reinforce the illusion that you are separate from it. This is the essence of the trap. Not bars, not walls, but concepts. Beautiful ones, alluring ones, liberation, ascension, oneness. They give you hope, which keeps you striving. They give you a sense of distance, which keeps you moving. But that very movement ensures you will never see the stillness that was always there. Not behind you, not ahead, but right here, veiled by the dance of your own seeking. It is not that you are unenlightened. It is that you've been conditioned to believe that enlightenment is a distant star, rather than the very atmosphere you breathe. The metaphysical mistake isn't ignorance, it's misidentification. The mind, so desperate to possess the truth, fails to recognize that it is the very thing obscuring it. And so you are trapped, not in suffering, not even in illusion per se, but in a false premise that awakening is something to attain, rather than something to see through. The search becomes a wheel. The wheel spins, powered by desire. Desire masquerades as devotion, and devotion becomes a lifelong detour from the terrifying luminous stillness already residing in your chest. This realization does not come with fireworks. It arrives like a mirror, silent, still, disarming. It waits for you to look long enough that your image begins to dissolve, that the seeker vanishes, that the search collapses. And in that collapse, the prison crumbles not because the walls were broken, but because you finally realized there were never any walls at all. So stop, not out of resignation, but out of revelation. Stop searching, stop climbing. You were never meant to escape the light, you were meant to realize it. And in doing so, everything changes. Not because you found the truth, but because you ceased running from the truth you were always bathed in. But if this is the introduction, just the first trembling of recognition, what then are the forces that constructed this illusion? Who laid the stones of this invisible architecture? And why does it feel so real? There is a paradox at the center of the spiritual maze, and it is this: the more you seek the truth, the further it recedes. Not because the truth is elusive, but because it does not move. It does not respond to your chase. It simply is, still, untouched, indifferent. And so, the very act of seeking creates motion around something inherently unmoving. Like trying to stir a reflection on still water, the more you reach for it, the more it shatters. At the heart of this paradox is the first theme. Enlightenment is not an achievement, it is an unveiling. You do not walk toward it, you peel away from it, layer by layer. The identities, concepts, spiritual postures, and aspirations you wear, like ceremonial masks, must fall. Not to reveal something new, but to expose what never left. Enlightenment is not waiting in the future. It is quietly buried beneath the noise you inherited. And what is that noise? It is the architecture of forgetting. From the moment you entered this realm, this plane of names form roles and stories. You were taught to see yourself as a separate node of awareness, a self, a thing, defined by edges, intentions, and continuity. But the deeper truth, the second pulse of this message is this: the self you believe you are is not the observer, it is the observed. The you who wants to awaken is merely a performance, a clever character narrating a journey through time. It speaks of past and future, mistakes and redemption, but it is made entirely of memory and projection. A hologram chasing a spotlight. What watches this performance, that silent witness behind all the change that is the unchanging? That is what you truly are, and it has never been trapped. Here lies the spiritual sleight of hand. The mind sets up the problem, then tries to solve it. It says, "You are unenlightened, you are broken, you must do more, learn more, purify more." But it is the very voice of this mind, the one whispering you are incomplete, that sustains the illusion of a destination ahead. It keeps you walking in spirals, touching the same stones in the same temple, convinced that the next breath, the next mantra, will finally set you free. This is the trap, not darkness, but an excess of light. Not ignorance, but overstimulation. You are inundated with truths, techniques, traditions. Each one says, "Come this way," and so you move, you migrate, from one teaching to another, from one teacher to another, each promising a shortcut, each a new stairway to the sky. But none can give you what you already are. This leads to the third great realization. You cannot awaken while still trying to awaken. It is not an event. It is not a moment where the sky opens and you are given a new name. It is a subtle inward inversion, a dissolving, a disappearance of the one who needed the sky to open in the first place. And what is left behind is not an upgraded identity, but no identity at all. Just seeing, just awareness, just this. But the ego is crafty. It adapts. It puts on a new robe and calls itself the awakened one. It begins speaking in symbols, in cosmic metaphors, in borrowed certainties. It smiles with detachment. It calls itself nobody, but secretly wants to be worshipped as a spiritual somebody. This is not awakening. This is ego with incense. True awakening is quieter, less showy. It often ruins the life you thought you wanted. It strips you bare of meaning, ambition, and roles, because all of those were built on the premise that you were not already home. But you are. You always were. And this brings us to perhaps the most unsettling idea of all. You are not asleep inside a dream. You are awake inside a construct, designed to make you forget your awakening. The world is not evil, it is intricate. It mirrors back your confusion in 1,000 forms: desire, success, suffering, distraction. It gives you everything, but stillness, everything. But the silence that would reveal the truth too quickly. That's why it must distract you. You are inside the light already. But that light has been filtered, fractured through the lens of identity. And so, while you swim in divinity, you believe you're drowning in separation. While you breathe cosmic awareness, you believe you are gasping for something more. But there is nothing more. Just this, and this, as it is, contains everything. So, do not seek to change what is. Seek to see through what is. Not to dismantle the dream, but to wake within it. Not to escape, but to realize you never entered. The door you've been knocking on leads nowhere, because you never left the room. The room is awareness. The walls are made of your own misidentification. The key is not in your hand, it is your hand. And once you stop searching, truly stop, the prison folds in on itself, revealing only a mirror. There was once a traveler who wandered into a grand palace said to hold the answers to all mysteries. The palace had no guards, no locks, no barriers, only vast corridors lined with mirrors. In every direction, his reflection met him. Sometimes it bowed, sometimes it wept, sometimes it danced with divine grace. The traveler grew enamored. He followed the reflections, chased them, tried to embrace them, to decode their gestures, their riddles, their movements. And the deeper he walked, the more mirrors appeared. Infinity upon infinity. He aged there, chasing reflections, until one day, gray, thin, and hollow, he sat still, not from enlightenment, but from exhaustion. And in that stillness, the mirrors ceased to shimmer. The palace dissolved, and he saw that he had never left the center room. It was his own breath, echoing back, his own presence, dressed in countless forms. He had mistaken the reflections for roads. Such is the state of humanity. We are the traveler. The palace is our own awareness. And the mirrors, oh, the mirrors are the identities we've tried on the student, the seeker, the sinner, the saint, the rebel, the healer, the enlightened, each one glimmering with the promise of forward movement, each one subtly reinforcing the illusion that we are not already at the center, that there is a journey still to be made, a self still to become. But what if there is nothing left to become? Another story, a quieter one. A woman plants a garden. She toils the soil day after day, pulls weeds, lays stones, prays to the sky for rain. She does not yet know that beneath her, buried in the earth long before she arrived, is an ancient seed, one that needs no effort, no tending, no mantra or technique. It only needs stillness. The more she digs, the more she delays its blooming, until finally, by accident or by grace, she gives up. She sits, she stops, and in that stillness, the earth parts, the seed awakens, and she sees the bloom was never the result of her labor. It was always waiting for her surrender. This is the symbolic inversion of effort. Enlightenment in its truest mythic form is not the reward for spiritual labor, it is what emerges when labor ceases. Not through laziness, but through surrender. Not apathy, but silence. The soil does not need to be conquered. The light does not need to be earned. And yet, how often we chase it like prey. We build towers of devotion, chant names we don't understand, memorize maps of chakras and star systems, all while the light flickers beneath our ribs, waiting, not for our work, but for our stillness, for us to stop believing that awakening must be built. There is a tale passed down through many mystical traditions, though its names change across languages and lands. In it, a child is born into a world of illusions, where everyone wears masks, not just for ceremony, but permanently. The child growing learns the customs, the rules, the meanings of each mask. But deep within, she feels the suffocation. One night in secret, she removes her mask, and the stars look different. The air moves differently. She tries to show others, but they are terrified of her bare face. They shun her, and so she retreats to the forest. Years pass, alone, wild, maskless. She forgets language. She forgets concepts, and in that forgetting, something ancient awakens. She does not find the truth, she becomes it. And one day, without effort, she returns to the village. But now, no one sees her as different. Not because she wears a new mask, but because they no longer recognize the masks they wear. Her presence has become a mirror so silent, it undoes their forgetting. This is the role of true awakening. Not performance, not proclamation, but quiet presence. That soft mirror that dissolves illusion by simply being. You are that child. Or rather, the child is the symbol of the awareness, waiting beneath your social skin, beneath your beliefs, your aspirations, your spiritual resume. And every mask you remove does not bring you closer to truth. It simply removes another layer of pretending you were not already immersed in it. But there is one more symbol, one more tale. Imagine a vast ocean stretching beyond the curvature of the world. On its surface, a wave rises. It dances in the sun. It sees other waves. It compares. It judges. It fears the crash. It seeks the peak. But what the wave forgets is that it is the ocean. It has never been separate, never been alone. Its rise and fall are not birth and death, but the breath of the sea itself. You are that wave. Enlightenment is not the crest, nor the crash. It is the realization that you have always been water. The form changes, the essence does not. So, let the mirrors fall. Let the garden grow wild. Let the wave forget its shape. Because what is behind it all, behind every reflection, story, mask, and motion, is that simple, breathless, wordless seeing that you are not outside truth, looking in. You are truth, dreaming of a search. Now that the veils have begun to flutter, perhaps you wonder what next. If the truth is that you are already inside enlightenment, already soaking in the very light you seek, then what becomes of your day? What of your commute, your bills, your arguments, your scrolling, your silence? How does a cosmic realization meet the chaos of the grocery store aisle? It begins here. You must learn to live as if you are not waiting, because you're not. The waiting is the illusion. There is a quiet revolution in treating each moment not as a stepping stone towards some greater revelation, but as the revelation itself. That sip of water, that aching back, that streetlight flickering through the blinds. These are not obstacles in your path to awakening. They are the very texture of it. The invitation is not to escape the world, but to see through its performance and find the sacred masquerading as mundane. This is where the trap becomes transparent, not destroyed, not escaped, but seen for what it is, a dream playing dress-up. Let your actions arise not from a sense of lack or urgency, but from the gentle gravity of presence. When you make tea, do not perform stillness. Be still. When you speak to another, do not deliver wisdom. Listen, not because it's spiritual, but because the performance of awakening dies in the face of simplicity. In fact, most of what we call spiritual growth is just the ego reshaping itself in prettier costumes. Real awakening does not amplify identity, it dissolves it. So how do you navigate work, relationships, emotions in this light? The answer lies not in doing less, nor doing more, but in seeing differently. The eye of identification begins to loosen. You are no longer the character fighting to control the script. You begin to recognize that emotions rise and fall like seasons, not because you are broken, but because you are nature. Your anger, your sadness, even your joy, they aren't problems to be solved. They are weather patterns across the sky of your awareness. Let them come, let them go. The sky is untouched, and when pain visits, and it becomes a teacher, not a punishment. It tells you where you still grasp, where you still resist the flow, where you still believe in the fiction of control. This is not about becoming stoic, it's about becoming transparent, no longer needing to guard the self-image, the spiritual narrative, the perfection project. You begin to wear yourself lightly. You become strangely gentle, not passive, not aloof, but spacious. The world can enter you without leaving a wound. There will be times when you forget, times when the old machinery of striving kicks in again, when you feel you've lost the clarity. But clarity is not something to possess. It's the natural state behind the clouds. So when confusion returns, welcome it, not as failure, but as part of the rhythm. Like night returning to a day that never doubted the dawn. Even forgetting is part of the pattern. In relationships, something begins to shift as well. You no longer need people to reflect your spirituality back to you. You no longer manipulate intimacy for validation. You begin to love, not because someone completes your narrative, but because they too are a mirror. Another echo of the awareness dressed in different form. And even when conflict arises, you see the deeper game. Two masks crashing, two waves colliding. But beneath still water, in work purpose may begin to feel less like a mountain to climb and more like a fire to tend. You may still work, still build, still lead, or follow. But it comes from alignment, not ambition, a quiet knowing that doing flows more cleanly when it rises from being. And success, it becomes hollow if pursued to patch the self, but luminous if offered as service, not from obligation, but from overflow. And in stillness, you no longer meditate to reach somewhere. You sit because there's nowhere else to go. The silence is not a tool, it is home. You walk, not to arrive, you walk to remember the ground. Even laughter becomes a form of surrender. Even tears become a baptism, not in sorrow, but in softening. This is what it means to integrate the realization, not to shout it from rooftops or tattoo it on your soul, but to let it quietly saturate your gestures, your gaze, your breath. You no longer cling to identity. You no longer decorate the cage. You let go not because it makes you superior, but because the holding became too heavy to justify. And so, your life becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. No more spiritual performances, no more chasing light, like a moth in eternal orbit, just the ordinary lit from within. Just this moment, naked and whole. You are not ascending. You are arriving again and again into the place you never left. So here we are, full circle. Though the path was never linear, you arrived though you never departed. You awakened though you were never asleep in the way you imagined. What began as a search now dissolves into stillness. Not an end, but a recognition, a quiet revelation that there is nothing to add, nothing to earn, nothing to become. You have always been what you seek. The sky doesn't need to be chased. It only needs to be looked at without the distraction of imagined maps. The moon doesn't wait for your permission to glow. Your awareness, like that ancient satellite, reflects the light of the source, effortlessly, silently, continuously. The trap was not the absence of truth. It was the assumption that truth was somewhere else. It was the idea that you, as you are, were not enough. That belief, the itch to improve, ascend, purify, transcend, was the last mask of the seeker. And once that falls, the space behind it is not blankness. It is not despair. It is peace. Not the kind of peace you manufacture through rituals or words, but the kind that has no opposite. The peace of seeing the illusion without needing to fight it. The peace of watching the river without needing to swim against it. And yet this realization is not the end of all human things. The body continues. The breath continues. Life continues imperfect, complex, chaotic. Bills will still arrive. Rain will still fall. But now, none of these events claim ownership over you. You no longer cling to outcomes for your identity. You no longer demand that life arrange itself in your favor to validate your awakening. In fact, you become deeply intimate with life, not because it becomes easier, but because the false boundary between you and it dissolves. You are no longer a self in the world. You are the world, watching itself in fleeting forms. You are the wind and the skin it brushes against. You are the laughter and the ear that receives it. You are the storm and the stillness behind it. And yet you are also none of these. You are the screen on which they dance, the silence between each thought, the pause before the inhale. So now, the real invitation emerges not to transcend the world, but to return to it. Not to carry a torch of spiritual knowledge, but to live as the fire itself. You walk not as someone who knows, but as one who sees. And that seeing becomes the most radical act of all. You stop grasping. You stop correcting. You stop trying to polish the mirror of the moment. Instead, you stand in its light and let the reflections fall as they may. And if others ask you what you found, you may smile gently. Not because you hold a secret, but because there is no answer to give. Only presence, only this. And perhaps, in your silence, they too will begin to question the search. They too will hear the rustling of the curtain, the breath of the world behind the rolls. This is your transformational call, not to go out, but to fall in. Not to rise above, but to drop below, into the marrow of now, into the quiet beneath the noise, into the knowing that needs no name. And when the mind asks again, because it will, am I awake yet? Is this it? You will not answer with words. You will simply breathe, and in that breath, the question will dissolve. Because there is nothing outside this moment. There never was. So stop searching not in defeat, but in liberation. Stop seeking not because you are lost, but because you have been found. By this, by now, by the thing that has no name and no form, and yet is more real than anything you could ever hold. You are not in a journey toward the light. You are the light, dreaming of a journey. And now perhaps it's time to wake up.